All right, welcome to another Rooster Talk. Today I've got Andy Jiang from Sydney. We've had a chat before, Andy, probably about 4 weeks ago. Andy, you know, with all the issues that we have, I guess now we're sort of standing at the end of the tunnel, looking sort of at the light source now. Share some light on if there is a clarity on the tourism industry.
Look, the tourism industry has been the first industry to be affected by COVID-19. And on the way out, it probably will be one of the last industries to be fully recovered. I mean, for one thing, the borders are still closed, so we have almost no inbound travel or no international travel. We have good news that starting 1st of June, for example, that people living in New South Wales can travel within New South Wales. And I think many states across Australia are relaxing the restrictions to allow intrastate travel, which is step one. That gives tourism industry some breathing space to get on the road of recovery. The critical milestone is when the state borders within Australia will be reopened. And we have seen that this has been quite a contentious issue for politicians. And the argument of economy versus health, it's very difficult, and I don't think that either side can claim absolute authority on that because travel during a pandemic like COVID-19 is always going to be a trade-off, and it's also about when people feel that they're safe to travel. So there is a bit of a self-selection process as we come out of it. So I believe that when the state borders are reopened, it will provide a further boost to the tourism industry. But until then, the recovery prospect still seems to be long in comparison to other industries.
I mean, in terms of, I guess, international tourism is going to be off the table for a while. We have domestic traveling. I think even I thought about, traveling domestically, just going for a few days away. And do you think there's enough potential or the fact that there is no other choice, that the gap of international tourism could be filled by what's been offered domestically?
I think, look, surely with Australians not being able to travel overseas, there's potential of them travel domestically and spend their tourism dollars within Australia that can somewhat fill the gap that's being left by the missing international travelers. But look, there are challenges to that. First of all is during the lockdown, a lot of us have used our annual leave days, whether it's intentional or voluntary, or being asked to do so in order to help the businesses. The fact is, many of us come out of this with a smaller annual leave balance than going into the lockdown. So that means whether we have enough days to actually take a vacation is yet to be seen. And the second, is that in addition to state borders, to really drive domestic travel, and people will travel interstate. Because I think we're not going to count on intrastate travel to fill in a gap. We have to actually, rely on domestic travel in an interstate travel sense, and that is going to be driven by available aviation capacity. What we know is that Virgin is still in the process of being sold, and there seems to be less than $100 million on its balance sheet. So whether that sales process can be wrapped up before further bridging loans provided by either the government or some other source to ensure a robust outcome, we don't know yet. So until then, we've only got Qantas, and we don't have any update in regard to the restoration of interstate aviation capacity for the time being. And so the airfare as well as the restoration of routes will also be quite a big factor to drive the domestic travel outcome. And the third challenge is the confidence of travelers who feel that travel domestically is safe, as well as the financial position that they're in that allow them to take a holiday, at the prevailing price level of domestic travel. And I know that the statistics on despite a very grim unemployment rate, I know that the hours worked and wage bill have been falling, and that means that underemployment as well as the total salaries have been actually declining over the past few weeks. And probably going forward, these will not be restored quickly. So people, even though that they haven't, lost their jobs, might still be worried about their future. And travel being a discretionary spend item, in this slide, probably will get scrutinized a bit more. And so that is the third challenge, I believe. Now, as much as the tourism industry are really looking forward for Australians to travel more, it's up to the Australians to say that, you know what, I feel that the normality has returned, and I think nothing speaks more for the return to normality than being able to book a flight and go somewhere that you want to go. So I really hope that they will come soon.
Yeah, I think like it's a crystal ball future, I say, for everybody. It's there's no precedence to how this would end or how it would turn out to be. I guess, and in the way that we've been conducting business, like how we're talking over Zoom, you're in Sydney, I'm in Perth, that could also impact on future airline business to some degree. And those points you made are quite interesting, because when we're used to something, we tend to just stick to it. And then when your employers see that, hey, Andy and Noel can do this conversation over Zoom, which cost me nothing, and they spend a good hour talking instead of me spending, XYZ dollars flying him there and all this kind of stuff, will have greater impact as well, additional impact, I guess, to some degree. Look, I guess in some ways, one of the things that has crept up over the last few weeks is obviously these trade issues. I was keen to have a chat with you because you've had dealings with that, to and froing before. So what's your take on all this?
Look, I think the trade issues between China and Australia are unfortunate. I believe that as diplomats, as politicians, foremost, it is important to, think of the national interest, not just from a political perspective, but also from an economic perspective. And, so therefore, whether it doesn't matter if the politicians from both sides are not the best friends, the connectivity between Australian businesses and the Chinese businesses are stronger than ever. And both countries are quite dependent on each other, regardless how politicians like to spin it. And we, I look at this from a few angles. One of which is that I understand, the need for the international community to understand the origin of virus. And I believe that if you speak to any Chinese person, they are on the same page. And so how is it possible to take a topic that everyone's on the same page and somehow turn into a very contentious international dispute is beyond what I could comprehend. And I can only look at this perspective from the politicians themselves and the way that they handle this particular process, and the way that they used the languages which then being exploited by the media to create the level of hostility that this should not have existed in the first place. But at the end of the day, I do believe that the businesses, whether they're in China or in Australia, that they need each other. And I think as the economy tries to recover, that both countries, the economic interest is to ensure a stronger trading partnership, not a weaker one. So that I hope that the businesses and industries will exert a stronger leadership role in the restoration of that important bilateral trade relationship than what our politicians have done so far.
Yeah, well, it's. I think the word you're looking for, it's a game of politics. That's why it's escalated to the level that it is, and plus the media loves these kind of contentious topics. It draws more eyes to, well, in these days, to the screen. And I guess you sort of wonder whether it could escalate more. But I think in your what you shared there, it makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask, do you think it's going to escalate more? I think my guess is that it's lesser than, say, maybe a week ago. Would that be a fair comment?
Look, I don't think that we have crossed the point of no return for a trade war, so that there are always rooms to de-escalate. And I felt that the diplomats, the politicians, will need to find a fine balance in terms of, not to perceive and to give in, or as Scott Morrison said, trade Australian values for economic interest, versus the actual reality of the economic recovery in the COVID-19 context, because at the end of the day, the words are just words, and in order for the economies to move forward, we need to find a better way to deal with the trade relationship, and I think that drives the ultimate better outcome for people and businesses from both countries.
I guess, all right. Finally, I guess, do you think, if you ask me, I think this is just going to peter out into sort of nothing over time. It'll be a tit for tat, but then as all these kind of issues, they just peter out to nothing after a while. But in the broader sense of where economics is and where everybody is, obviously everyone talks about how and I think we touched on this, some of the manufacturing industry may become localized because suddenly everyone realized, hey, we're sort of too dependent on exports. Do you think that because it's such an evil queue in the sense of like everybody's got the same sort of issues, everyone's thinking almost the same thing, that the rebalancing of trade could be easier handled now, taking into account maybe the China issue or whatever, because everybody's sort of moved back significantly enough for rebalancing of trade to happen easier? Do you know what I mean?
My perspective is that global trade is a long-term trend. And it's convenient for any politician to say during a pandemic that we need to bring back manufacturing. But the reality is that the labor cost in Australia is higher than many places around the world. And for Australian consumers to be willing to pay for a higher price on goods and services, which can be obtained at a lower cost, and that is an economic decision. That is a fundamental market supply and demand decision. So I will, go back to Adam Smith, the invisible hand. And I do think that the market economy under the invisible hand will continue to champion for international trade. But yes, there are arguments for supply chain security. It's convenient to say it right now because we have seen our supply chain being disrupted. But again, in the long-term sense, we as human beings, we have short memory. When we have the same conversation a year from today, then we will not be having that the same perspective again. So I think it's important, for any government not to lose the long-term sight of the globalization and the importance of trade, and hopefully that we will see COVID-19 in the past sooner than later.
All right, well, that's fair enough. I think, look, Andy, you've shared some fantastic comments, well balanced. But again, Andy, thanks for giving me your time. I can see it's very dark now there. Look,
Right.
hoping you keep well, and maybe let's do another catch up, and hopefully we'll have something different to discuss in terms of going forward. And I'm pretty sure by then most of what we've discussed would have changed dramatically. Things seems to change very, very much in a very quick fashion these days.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts, and looking forward to talking to you again.
All right. Thanks, Eddie. Keep safe.
Right. Thank you. Okay.